So the money flow is not going into productive sectors. It's going in to create bubbles, and that I think is the main problem. Why did the recession not occur earlier? Because if, for example, people get unemployed, it's just a movement of labor, 20% of the labor from one country to another country, the unemployment is transferred. You should have seen this recession a lot earlier. So I'm saying that was masked by this money movement, which created a bubble. So the financial engineering from Wall Street transferred, and the policy of the US government to promote housing, channel the savings into housing, leading to housing bubble, and the myopic households just believed that this is real wealth and increased their consumption, and this hid the problem for a while. And some support for some of this you can see, of course. Economy in China and India grew phenomenally. In fact, that of China grew tremendously during this period. You can see in 1982, the economies of India and China were roughly of the same size. In 2002, I go only up to 2002, I think. Not sure. Okay, it's about more than twice. And if you look at the percentage of export as a percentage of GDP, you can see that exports have gone up tremendously. So there's a lot of effect. I think a lot of it through offshoring. And also if you look at the Chinese urban population, their stated objective is to move about 20 million people every year by creating new jobs in the urban areas and moving people from the rural areas. And this urban population in China, for example, has increased by nearly 300 million from 1990 to 2007. So all this, I think, is due to creation of new jobs, in a large part due to offshoring, and of course, to a large extent also due to the Chinese economy catering to the local demand. But I think offshoring played a major role. And there's also some evidence of pressure on US wages. In 2000, wages and salaries was about 56.7% of GDP. In 2007, it was 53.7%. And so it went down, the share went down by 3% from 2000 to 2007. So you can argue that it certainly didn't go up. However, as we saw earlier, consumption as a percentage of GDP increased because of the housing bubble and the perceived increase in wealth. And Wall Street engineering, of course, helped quite a bit. So I'm going to follow up now more on the Wall Street financial engineering. If you look at the origination of non-prime mortgages, it rose from 500 billion in 2000 to 1.5 trillion in 2005. Mortgages prior to 1990 were mostly conventional conforming mortgages, first lien mortgages. Mortgages during the late 90s, a lot of them were non-conforming, private label securitization, and asset-backed securities, all these things, about 50% market share by 2006. The share of private label ABS increase is given in this picture, and you can see that since 2000, there's a very sharp increase. You can see that. The share of the private label ABS as a percentage of as a fraction of the other agency and GSE. And it happened after 2000. And origination of non-prime mortgages tripled during this period. As you can see that the standard mortgages share actually started declining. You can see here. So the point that I'm trying to make is that other types of mortgage investments than standard ones increased in market share. And this is also an association. I'm not going to establish causality here, but it stands to reason that it had a big role to play in the housing bubble. Housing prices increased from 100 to 186, the Case-Shiller index. And of course, one would expect the wealth effect to keep up consumption and when the bubble came, the recession followed. I want to argue that housing bubble is different from stock market bubble. Because if you look at the stock market, July 2000 to September 2001, the NASDAQ prices dropped by 60%. And the S&P 500 prices index dropped by 30%. These are huge drops in a very short period of time, but we didn't see a recession. And not only that, I think to some extent the Fed fund, for example, the Fed followed an easy money policy to help a little bit, and I think that did help. In fact, the interest rate came down from 5.3% to 2.09%. But the housing bubble collapse, in contrast, the reason is why it has a big effect is for two reasons. One is that large fraction of the households, they own housing and they don't own stocks as much. I'll show that in a moment. And even a 25% drop in the housing value will wipe out the equity of most households in housing. So the bigger wealth effect because of the leverage. And also, if you get all the equity wiped up, you have to ask yourself, you are in a recession, how do you get out of a recession? That means my job is no longer the best job for me. I have to sell my house, move somewhere else and take another job. But then no, I cannot sell my house because I have very little equity. If I sell it, I can't go and buy anything else anywhere. And so it just makes mobility very difficult. So when housing market comes down, transaction housing becomes very difficult, and it's very difficult for people to move from one place to another. So that also curtails recovery with the speed of recovery. So let's look at some numbers here. If you look at the middle three wealth class quintiles in 2004, the principal residence is about 66% of all the assets of the household. Corporate equity is only about 8%. Stock holdings, 49% of the families own stocks. In contrast, 68% of the families are primary residents, own their primary residence. So you may say that that's not a big number, but look at the median value. The median value of stock holding is only 24,000. The median value of house is about 131,000. If you look at leverage, mortgage debt, 47% of the real estate value. Whereas other debt is only 7% of all the other assets values. So mortgage is the primary way that people lever up, taking money out to lever up their investments. Averages actually understate the severity of leverage in real estate. In 2006, 51% of the loans that were originated had a loan to value ratio of greater than 80%. Combined loan to asset value ratio. And also I want to argue that money channeled into, that's one thing, that housing is important for most households relative to stock market. Number two, money flowing into housing also has a bigger effect in terms of creating a bubble. I'm going to argue that it's a little bit different than the standard leverage argument. So when money is directed to the stock market, it's not going to have as big an effect as money directed into housing market. Let's see why.